Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jacquelyn Humphrey. I'm an Associate Professor in Finance and a leader of the Business School, which is one of the interdisciplinary research teams here at the UK Business School. Before we start the seminar, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are all on today. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the webinar, which is titled The Real Cost of Remote Work, Impacts for Managers, the Environment and Staff Wellbeing. The webinar is hosted by the Business Sustainability Initiative, and we're delighted to also be joined by two members of two other interdisciplinary research themes. So the Future of Health and the Service Innovation Alliance. And two of their members will be joining us as panel members for the webinar today. I'm now going to play a short video just introducing the Business Sustainability Initiative.
UQ Business Sustainability Initiatives helps businesses to design strategies to help build a sustainable future. So our internationally renowned researchers tackle social and environmental challenges to promote adaptation and organisational resilience.
We help future-proof organisations and communities by analysing environmental, social and business issues to implement innovation.
These may involve new approaches to financing, updating a business model, or reusing waste material to create new products. We take a whole of business approach. Our four key capability areas are
corporate sustainability, capital markets, social impact and entrepreneurship, and tourism.
Our researchers work with all types of business, from non-profits, small to medium-sized enterprises, large corporations, and institutional investors. Some of our diverse partnerships include Suncorp, Opera Queensland, Brisbane Airport, Rock Trade, and Queensland Treasury Corporation.
The Business Sustainability Initiative also delivers education around sustainability issues, including executive education for professionals and organisations, university topics, and even high school programs. For example, our strategy lecturers are currently working with Brisbane schools to deliver sustainable leadership workshops to students.
Since launching just over a year ago, we've worked with more than 25 businesses, governments and NGOs within Australia and internationally. We have a passion for creating positive change. So how can we help you to make a sustainable difference through your business?
All right, before we start the session, I need to do just some brief housekeeping. So you'll see in your Zoom webinar, there's two functions. So you've got a Q&A and a chat function. If you have questions as we go, please type those using the Q&A function. We'll address questions if there's going to be a Q&A section at the end of the webinar after we've heard from all of our presenters. Please also feel free to indicate if you'd like a specific panel member to address your question. Otherwise, I will direct it to one of the panel members who's most appropriate. If you're experiencing technical issues or if you have any comments, please use the chat function and we'll do our best to address those as we go. I'd like to introduce our panel for this afternoon. So we've got Jacquelyn Sun, who's a senior lecturer in tourism at the Business School, and she's a key member of the Business Sustainability Initiative. Jacquelyn's research focuses on the macro level evaluation of tourism impacts on both the economy and the environment. Jacquelyn's recent work looks at the economic losses and environmental gains of the COVID-19 pandemic at the global level. So this afternoon, Jacquelyn's presentation will consider the effects of remote work from the perspective of the environment. We then have David Solnet, who's an Associate Professor of Service Management and a founding member of the Service Innovation Alliance Interdisciplinary Research Team. David is recognised internationally for his research, teaching and consulting, all of which focus on managing and leading service organisations, with particular emphasis of the employee-customer interface. Most recently, his research has focused on service work and challenges relating to employee well-being. David comes from a restaurant background, with over 18 years of experience, including senior management roles in the US and in Australia. So today, David's presentation will consider the real cost of remote work from the perspective of the employee. Nicole Hartley is the UQ MBA Program Director and a research academic within the Business School. She also leads the Future of Health Interdisciplinary Research theme. Nicole's expertise is in service marketing, decision-making, service innovation, and consumer behavior, and her research agenda focuses on exploring stakeholder perceptions of the advent of technology and various forms of disruption in the delivery of services. Nicole's presentation today will consider the real costs of remote work from the perspective of the manager. So without further ado, I'd now like to pass to Jacquelyn.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me today to talk about the environmental effects of remote work. In the past few months, a lot of people are transit to remote work, and this creates a difference of energy use patterns across workplace, commuting, and home office. And of course, this has certain implications to the environment. So today I want to share with you our research that quantifies the environmental effects of remote work at the global level. So first of all, I want to just to provide you some information regarding how is the change is looking like when people start to work at home. And the first level of the difference is related to workplace. So when employees do not come to the office, of course, the building itself is used less amount of energy, and this includes electricity, water, natural gas. But besides that, we are also seeing the less amount of gasoline used for the company's vehicles, because when people don't come to office, it's very less likely they are going to use the company's vehicle for any business travel. And for the second component, commuting, the environmental effect of commuting will depend on the average travel distance as well as the transportation mode that employees use. So whether they come to work by walking, bicycling, public transportations, or private vehicles, this will determine what's the energy that's saved due to the reduced demand on the commuting. And for the third component, we are seeing an increased energy use for our home office. And this also relates to how much time that you are going to spend at home for work, as well as the energy efficiency of your place. Whether you have solar panels, whether you have energy efficient appliances at home. So ultimately, the environmental effects of remote work depends simultaneously on the consideration of these three components. And before COVID, the topic of the environmental effects of remote work received very little attentions and discussions. And the reason for that is we are seeing very low penetration rate of remote working. Leah, next slide, please. Okay, so across the global, basically before the COVID, the penetration rate is less than 3%. In other words, for any given sectors that have difficulties mobilize their employees, less than 3% of employees are willing to work at home. But the COVID then introduced a very unique context. So with the global mobility restrictions, we are seeing business and employees are transferred to mobility working within a very short period of time. But unfortunately, we don't have official data to indicate how many people or what extent of remote working that is currently happening. But thanks to technology, we have other data sets available to give a proxy in terms of the penetration rate. So if you have smartphone, basically the Google will automatically trace your mobility pattern. It will record the places you have visited and how much time you have spent at that particular locations. And Google just made these data sets available earlier this year. So we are able to utilize this particular data set and identify the changing time patterns associated with telework. So for across 129 countries, from February to May, and we found that people's length of time at workplace has reduced by 24.4% compared to the pre-COVID period. And in contrast, people's length of time at home increased by 11%. And this pattern is also quite consistent with respect to the Apple iPhone data set. So we believe this is a good proxy to indicate the level of penetration rate across different countries. And if we look at the number, 24.4%, this is an amazing change. And if we translate this number into a per worker basis, this means that 1 in every 4 workers on this planet have started to work at home. So this is a larger scale, rapid work style changes during the COVID. And this also gives us a very good data to understand what's the environmental effects of remote work. So next slide, please. So we look into the data across 129 countries from the mid-February to the end of May. And we find that the global greenhouse gas emissions have been reduced by 1.5% due to remote working. PM 2.5, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxide have been reduced by 1.2% to 2.2%. You may think these numbers are not big. However, if we are able to maintain the current momentum of teleworking and continue the pattern for a year, then this is going to translate into much bigger numbers. Next, Leah, please. So if the pattern is sustained for a year, then we are able to cut back greenhouse gas emissions by 5%. And this is half of what we need of 9 to 10% annual emission reductions in order to keep the global temperature growth within 1.5 degrees Celsius. In other words, if we can combine technology, carbon pricing, and large-scale remote working, basically, we are in a very good position to control the carbon emission growth and to fight against climate change. And for the other 3 air pollutions, PM 2.5, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxides, we are able to cut them back in a range of 4% to 8%. And I want to point out that these 3 air pollutants are tied closely to our health problems. They are related to many respiratory problems, such as asthma, tightness of chest, or shortness of breath. So if we are able to reduce them within this particular range, basically it's going to reduce a lot of health hazards for the community, especially for the children and for the older population. Next slide, please. So what's the implications for the companies? I think from a corporate social responsibility perspective, remote working is something that's worth investing and supporting. This is not only going to cut back carbon emissions, but it's also going to help to create a better air quality for the community where the business is operating. But besides that, I think remote working is also going to give certain financial advantage to the business. And in the past few years, we observed there is a surge of green finance. And this is a movement that allow investors to look for companies that have been committed and act aggressively to cut back their carbon emissions. And in the process of green finance, every business has to submit a corporate carbon report. And within the report, it will cover 3 different scopes of emissions. And if right now the company is committed to remote working, then you will help to reduce the business car travel emissions. And this is the scope 1 emissions. In addition, it will reduce the electricity use for the office building. This is scope 2 emissions. And then you will reduce the emissions associated with employee commuting trips. This is scope 3 emissions. In other words, if a firm is committed to remote working, then they will be able to demonstrate a significant progress in cutting back their carbon emissions, not only for this year, but for a long-term period. And this is something that needs to be documented, highlighted, and well communicated to different people. So if you are able to commute this particular information to your customers. Then you are able to show that, yes, the product you consume is having less and less amount of carbon footprint. If you are able to communicate this message to the public, then you are able to demonstrate and establish your company's brand name and how useful embracing the remote working is for the environment and for the community. And if you are able to show this evidence to the investors, then they will have a better confidence and will have more interest to invest and financially support your company. So overall, we feel that remote working does have a great potential. This is something that's good for the environment, but it's also going to create certain financial benefits for the company, and it will create a win-win situation. But before we fully commit on remote working, I think there are several barriers we need to overcome. And one particular barrier is about employee welfare. So next, I would like to turn the presentation to the Associate Professor David Solnet, and he's going to share his insights in terms of the challenges that employees have gone through in the past few months and provide some solutions forward. Thank you, and David, you have it.
Okay. Thank you, Jacquelyn, for your always charming and interesting presentation. I'm now, as Jacquelyn suggested, going to turn to the other side of that. We have an environmental side, but we also have an employee well-being side. I'd like to acknowledge both my co-presenters, Jacquelyn and Nicole. I know them both well, and also the Business Sustainability Initiative. This is a great part of the UK Business School's move to interdisciplinary research themes, and it's a great privilege to be here to speak to you about this interesting and relevant topic. I also note that Nicole and I are speaking on essentially the same topic, but from different perspectives. So I think we'll be able to look at the same point, but look at it from a managerial point of view, which will be Nicole, and from an employee point of view, which will be mine. My research over the last 20 years links to my 20 or so years that I spent in the hospitality industry. And my research has always focused on frontline workers, really mainly interested in how organizational practices affect employee attitudes, employee behaviors. But over the years, since moving to academia, my interest has slowly shifted from an organization or managerial perspective to more of a humanistic or employee-centered view. And this pivot to the employee has brought me on an interesting research journey into employee well-being. So this topic fits quite nicely with my growing area of research interest in employee well-being. I also note this, that during the current pandemic, most of my research has focused not on remote work or telework, but more so on the horrific impacts that COVID-19 has had on many frontline roles. These are things like layoffs and stand downs and furloughs and all sorts of new words, heavily impacting many of the sectors. Now, in pulling these 10 or now 9 minutes of information together, what I've done is I've consulted both academic literature, but also a whole range of consulting reports and industry reports, International Labor Organization, Gallup, and many others, trying to synthesize the current state of play on this topic, because we all have an opinion on this topic, but there's also a lot of research been done, which I hope to share with you over a very short 8 minutes that I have left. The first thing that you may or may not be aware of is where telework, the concept, came from. And that really was developed in the 1970s. However, the concept of telework really grew significantly in the 1990s. And it's where we first heard the term, work is something you do, not somewhere that you go. I love what the Italians have done. They've developed a term called smart work, which is an agreement between parties with no precise constraints in terms of the working hours or physical workspace. I think that's really, really smart. And I give it to those Italians, not just good food and smart dressing, but also pretty smart use of these kinds of concepts. So the first thing I want you to do, because we all have this experience, or many of us do, certainly probably on this session, is ask you what you think about telework. Everyone has an opinion on this topic. No matter where I go, that's almost one of the first things that people talk about. Everyone has an opinion on working from home, and certainly an opinion about video conferencing. Some love it, some hate it, and everything in between. I have one significant problem with this topic, and that's the second point on my PowerPoint slide. It's called the telework divide. And the reality is that we are inherently talking about a group of people who do telework that have the fortune of being able to work from home and work remotely. But many cannot do this. The bottom left picture in the pictures there shows, I believe those are Starbucks employees in the States doing takeaway coffees. But if you think about fast food and retail and healthcare and supermarkets and public transport, there are many people who don't have the opportunity to work remotely. Julianne Mahler, I believe she coined the phrase, the telework divide in 2012, and I really like this. It really focuses on the fact that young, less educated workers at the bottom of the wage distribution scale have few, if any, telework options. They have any choice. So in other words, the most disadvantaged in our workforce before COVID-19 have become even more disadvantaged now. So before going further into this topic, I just would like to acknowledge all of those people unable to do telework, sort of telework discrimination. So my subject is well-being, employee well-being. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on definitions, but it's important just to raise a few when we think about these words. Defining well-being can really be a Pandora's box, but in general, when we think of well-being, we think of not just not being sick, but rather on how well we are in our life. And well-being is considered across a range of dimensions, generally things like physical well-being, psychological well-being, which takes into account emotions and mental well-being. There's social, there's financial, and there's others. It is very safe to say that there's a positive and strong connection between well-being and many positive personal and work outcomes. And well-being has to be looked at in context as well. In a short-term crisis, perhaps our zone of well-being tolerance might be really high. But as we settle into a longer-term reality, impacts can start to creep in. And this is often exacerbated by the organizational point of view, and I'll let Nicole talk more about that. But organizations tend to be saying things like, hey, we've survived this telework thing. It's going pretty well, let's keep going, without doing any necessary interventions to change the way the organizations operate, which can exacerbate some of the challenges. I'll speak briefly on two main areas of well-being relevant to this presentation. One is physical well-being, mainly through the workspace and what happens when we stay at home. And the second one is about psychological well-being, focusing mainly on mental well-being. Not to say other well-beings are not important, of course they are. So how might working from home or telework affect physical well-being? After all, if we're home, theoretically, we should have plenty of time to sneak off and do some exercise and stretch and use the home gym if we're lucky enough to have one. However, if you've seen all the photos that I've seen coming across social media, a lot of people have gained a lot of weight during this crisis when they're working from home. So I think that idea hasn't succeeded. So I want to ask you another couple of questions. Do you have a proper setup at home if you work from home? I think the top left picture, I'm not looking at those pictures now in the slide, is this beautiful, panacea of what it looks like to work from a perfect home office. But I don't think very many people have one that looks like that. Whatever your home work situation is like, has your employer helped you set it up? Is there a process in your organization to do so? Interesting, before COVID-19 last year, researchers found that only 24% of people who work from home regularly believe that they had a proper home office setup. And we know that number is declining now. So that's over 70% of people who don't have a proper office setup. And we know from research that 23% work in their kitchens, 20% work in their living rooms, 22% work in their bedrooms. There's also people working in their sheds, hallways, closets, on the floor, with their children, with the dog, all sorts of things. And I've seen lots of other interesting pictures many of you have seen as well. Many struggle with space, noise, light, poor internet signals, and in some cases, Netflix and the like. So here's another scary statistic. Research has shown that less than a quarter of all organizations that plan to increase telework beyond COVID have initiated any kind of strategic planning for what that will look like for employees. That's a bit of a concern. Let me talk now about psychological or mental health or mental well-being in this case. This is often called or considered the hidden cost of remote work. Now, I'll quickly find a basic definition for you for mental health or mental well-being, and that is the ability to cope with the normal stresses of life, work productively and fruitfully, and be able to contribute to one's community. Now, I think that's a tall order in the best of times. You add stress and uncertainty into that, and it gets harder, of course. So I'm not going to give you or pretend to give you a mental health lecture, But this topic is really, really important, particularly when so many people are involuntarily induced to work from home, where these little problems can sneak up and become significant ones. We know that about 2/3 of people working from home during the COVID-19 lockdown period believe that their mental health has been negatively impacted. And without proper support, employees can quickly spiral down and not be in the right headspace to give the best at work. Some of this can be caused by what we know as called hidden overtime, this insidious cycle of people sitting in front of their computer for longer hours, getting less productive, and saying things to themselves like, well, rather than driving, I'll just work a bit more. And interestingly, some organizations quite like this. It leads to claims of greater productivity. Some of my colleagues in the US have just finished some research about the effects of mental health from telework. And they studied 700 telecommuters between April and May, and they found a very close correlation between the effects and how impactful COVID-19 is in the area that they lived, with all sorts of things affecting their mental health, such as emotional exhaustion, decreased satisfaction with work, family balance, and feeling professionally isolated. Interestingly, having active friendships can actually go a long way to helping that. So what does all that mean? It means that mental health and well-being suffers when the conditions around you suffer as well, or worsen around you. And they worsen for you, the individual, and the organization. So I've got a couple of minutes left. I'm just going to quickly go through a couple of quick tips. How do we help employees with their well-being in these kinds of contexts, particularly in the crisis that we're in, but in telework generally? Now, I came up with dozens of these, but I had to drop them into 4 just to cover in the limited amount of time. You may have questions afterwards, and feel free to ask. As you look at these and listen to this quick run through these tips, because I'm in my 9th minute here, you'll realize that these are not unfamiliar suggestions, but I think during these kinds of crisis situations, and given what happens with telework, these kinds of suggestions become even more important in terms of organizational practices that impact workers. Number 1, manager and organizational empathy and care has to increase. This is more critical than ever. So does your organization really do this? Do they send out blanket emails to everyone saying things like, your well-being matters, and give you a link to click on? Or is there much more of a personal kind of approach? So management and organizational empathy and care, critical. Over-communicate and make sure supervisors are setting a well-being example. Number 2, physical well-being and workspace. So employee engagement rises dramatically when organizations give more than just lip service to their physical well-being, but also to their workspace. So it's important for organizations to engage actively in helping employees organize and design their workplace stations at their homes. Other things, you're probably all involved in things like this, Fitbit challenges, scheduling your day and blocking off time for non-work things, etc. Number 3, trust. My good colleague, Nicole Hartley, can talk about this really well, but it's quite simple. Well-being goes up when trust goes up. Moving to a results orientation rather than a control orientation makes a big difference to employee well-being, particularly in this context. The trust is like the glue that holds all aspects of telework together. The managers, teleworkers, and colleagues need to trust each other. And finally, and this is a big one, human resource management practices need a really big rethink now and following the end of this pandemic. It's long overdue. HR practices have to be more than just administrative and bureaucratic. They have to be strategic. Recognition and rewards have to change, more from just outputs and quantity to more holistic types of measures. And performance management needs to change and be more involved in regular engagement with employees, which is really, really important in this kind of context. So my last 30 seconds, where to from here? Well, no one really knows when and how we will return to the old normal. But in all likelihood, remote work will rise dramatically. KPMG suggests that 40% of organizations expect a significant increase in telework after the pandemic is over. Now that's great, but we need to make sure that we do this not in a blind way and investigate the right questions to ask and have empirically based answers. The more data, empirically based data that we have, the more emphasis that's placed on the employee perspective, the better our long-term outcomes will be. After all, we all know we're in this together, and what a great time this is for all of us to make positive changes to work and telework. Now, I will hand over to my colleague, Nicole Hartley, who will speak about this topic from the context of organizations and managers. Over to you, Nicole.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, David. It's great to see that we're on a very similar page when it comes to this topic. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be invited to share some insights on this extremely relevant topic at this time and add to the conversation that both Jacquelyn and David have started for us here today. As you know, my name is Nicole Hartley and I'm the MBA Director here at UQ Business School, and I'm also the lead of the Future of Health Interdisciplinary Research Hub here at the Business School as well. My research really is in understanding decision-making around the advent of technology in organisations, and so this is very much a space I'm familiar with. And today I'm going to be focusing on the managers' perspectives around this remote work model that we're seeing in play. As we've heard from Jacquelyn and David today, our world of work has changed significantly for organisations across sectors in response to COVID-19. And in fact, for many, remote work now has become the new business as usual model that we're seeing. But as the pandemic sort of evolves and starts to dissipate a little for some of us, I'm hearing more and more organisations from more and more organisations about their plans to actually further embed these new models of work and play, and predominantly focusing on combining the remote work aspect with the in or on-site work aspect as well. And this is really spawning what we're considering to be a hybrid virtual model of work. And this is going to see employees that are going to be on-site as well as employees that are going to continue to work from home, be that either in a full-time or in a part-time capacity. What we should acknowledge is that virtual work is not a new phenomenon. It has been around for many decades, and numerous firms from small to medium enterprises, obviously startups, and even larger corporations such as IBM, Yahoo, Google have trialled and implemented remote work models at scale. And that's been to varying levels of success. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. COVID, however, it really tipped the scale in terms of the implementation of remote working models instantaneously. And I think there's much to be learned collectively from our experiences over this time. If we first look at the potential benefits for companies in investing in hybrid virtual work models, these can be quite substantive and quite alluring for organisations, and we start to see the impact of that coming through. As you can see on the left-hand side of the slide there, these include outcomes such as greater access to talent, whether that's international talent or it's talent in other states, as it may be in Australia, increased productivity for individuals and teams as they work from home, lower cost with the reduction of office space rentals and overheads, flexibility for workers, choosing their work times, being able to be at home with their children. This is really resulting or can result in improved employee experiences, satisfaction and retention, which can offer competitive advantages for firms if it is done right. But despite the many indicators of the larger scale success of remote work through the pandemic, the longer term sustainability of this model of work really needs careful consideration. Many businesses over COVID have moved quickly to remote working models, embracing teleconferencing and loosely defined OHS practices and resource deployment to set up workers really quickly. The challenge for organisations now is to assess what they've done to embed and support remote working capabilities better, to ensure that the sustainability of this model really creates organisational as well as employee value that David was just talking about. After all, many of the large-scale trials of remote work, some of them I mentioned previously, like Yahoo and HP and IBM, they ended up reversing their remote model, their remote working models. Yahoo CEO Marissa Mayer iconically stated that the company needed to get back to being a one Yahoo again. And I think IBM dumped their remote working because it was stifling innovation and collaboration within the organizations. So when this is not done well, it is not sustainable for businesses. When we think about the nature of work, we know from years of research and practical knowledge that culture is significant, and if not probably the most significant driver of workplace performance. And culture really is at the crux of an organization's successful transition to a sustainable virtual hybrid model of work. What elements of culture are we really talking about here? Well, culture underpins basically everything we do. It underpins the norms of our work with an organisation. It creates the ways that we work. For example, the degree of teamwork or collaboration that we might have within our organisations, as well as our standards of behaviour, the ways in which we interact with each other, culture is driven by values, and as such, it is important for workplace cohesion and shared trust, which David alluded to before as well. So many of us, we've probably played a very valuable role in establishing and strengthening the culture of the places in which we work. And from us as individuals, that manifests in very many ways as well, from the way in which we greet each other in the hallways and we nod and smile at our colleagues, to how we recognise individuals' achievements at works and their successes at works. Here, we do a lot of trust building and cultural bonding by being human, and that needs to translate into our remote environments. In shifting to a virtual model of work, particularly one which involves hybrid work, both online and at home, there's a risk of two things really occurring. First, there can be an erosion of the culture across the organisation, or secondly, the emergence of two different cultures, one that is for an in-person culture and one that's coming out of an online culture. And the online culture is at risk of being dominated by this in-person culture, where workers and managers are able to leverage off in-person chats to each other, the small talk, the personal interactions that they have, leaving online workers feeling quite isolated and a little bit forgotten. And we've seen that happen over COVID, where organisations haven't embedded this well. Research really has shown that physical distance between team members or colleagues can create these voids that we see, which impact upon the organic exchange of ideas, people's creativity, their innovation, their ability to collaborate and network. And so these personal interactions and connections play a very powerful role in our everyday lives, and there's something that they need to be embedded into for good remote working practice to occur. We all know that an incidental chat in the lunchroom or in the corridors goes a long way to even just confirm something in your head that you were thinking, to try and help you work through a problem that you have, or to find a new perspective, or to gain that shared knowledge that's there within your organisations that you weren't already aware of. So these interactions also, help shift our moods and can be a source of motivation. So a smile from a colleague can sometimes go a long way when we're really faced with stressful days, or just general kindness and understanding from people when you're very short in an email perhaps, and people are wondering what's wrong with you. These nuanced yet really important cues and interactions are critical to building trust and positive organisational culture more collectively. We're yet to kind of replicate the water cooler effect online. Many apps are trying, but not doing very well at it. But your online workers really should be encouraged to choose an informal channel of their choice and have it as their own secure channel. It's a private channel for them that can help foster those organic personal interactions, while at the same time, those people that are in person should be encouraged to actually interact and connect with the remote workers through the same channels as well, to keep that dialogue open. A second critical consideration for managers in embedding remote work is what David spoke about just before, which was employee wellbeing. Studies have shown that remote workers have greater trouble sleeping, they encounter stress induced from isolation or trying to work under the pressures of balancing their life interruptions and being constantly tethered to their computers and their mobile devices. Employees are also susceptible to feelings of isolation and demoralisation due to less direction and some misunderstandings that arise from what's expected of them in their tasks, as well as the processes around their work when they're working from home. So to aid in fostering a culture of productivity and inclusiveness and fostering employee wellbeing, companies really must invest both time and money in both processes and structures that support remote workers and the work that they do. So what do I mean by processes and structures? Well, at a very base level, we want everyone to be connected to the internet. Sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. But companies really need to ensure that people have the right bandwidth, that they're connected to VPNs at home. Remote work can also be empowered by SaaS, by software as a service systems that allow teams and individuals to effectively communicate with each other, share documents, manage projects and deadlines. Performance dashboards can be used, as well as design sprint platforms as well. All of these enable workers to share dynamic content with each other in real time, and that's both for online and offline cohorts within your organisations. These investments really are baseline, though, for remote work success. Beyond this, organisations really need to invest time in formulating new work processes. And around that, it's really about for managers to sit down and really re-examine the organisation's approach to work, recognising that the way in which people work from in the office is very different to how they work at home. And there needs to be new structures in place to support them. Research to date has shown that there is a certain approaches that set up remote work quite well and for much greater success than others. First, it is that managers really need to set clear expectations on work and the decision-making process at play. We really need to sit down and go through guidelines, set priorities, set milestones, performance goals, and really consult employees on their availability to meet these goals and expectations around their everyday work at home. Managers need to also keep staff updated on what's going on. This involves open communication on deadlines and the availability of resources and the expectations as well as schedules. And that needs to be a two-way communication with the employees back to the managers. It's really about managing expectations in the workplace, about what work is required, coupled with how work shouldn't really encroach on employees after hours. It's too easy for us when we're working from home to fall into a trap of adding extra hours because we're not commuting and we have this extra time. It's great to have flexible time when we can actually dictate the hours and say, well, I work really late at night, so I'm going to work then. But when we start adding hours, that really needs to be addressed. And those parameters need to be set clearly by employers up front. Secondly, managers really need to make employee-centered decisions about the way they communicate with workers and how workers really communicate with each other. Both in the frequency of their communication as well as the choice of channels. And there's lots of channels, there's emails, texts, phone calls, video chats, chat functions. They all need to be considered. There's a really fine line to walk between constant messages from your supervisor through to radio silence. And both of those in the spectrum are not conducive to a good work environment. If you're stretching your employees across too many channels also, it really is disruptive to them in terms of their productivity. So I don't know how many hours I've wasted trying to get onto a video platform that I'm not really sure about. So we're trying to reduce that and try not to make it so overwhelming for our workers. So providing employees with access to both formal and informal communication platforms is optimal, allowing employees really to understand the channels that they would like to talk on and the channels that they would like to seek information on and help on. Because it's oftentimes when we need information and we need it now, and trying to dig down the rabbit hole of getting information is quite difficult. So structured decision-making and effective communication is really critical. Clear goals and reporting lines so that you know exactly who to go to when you need that bit of information is also really critical as well. Ultimately, for organisations, the emphasis really lies in investing in an outcome-driven culture that really empowers employees and holds them accountable also for getting the work done, because that's what they should be doing. This should be coupled with open, honest and supportive communication channels and really clear direction around goals and deadlines. And these are really the foundational blocks for remote work success, I believe. I think now my time is up. So I'm going to hand back now to Jackie from the Business Sustainability Initiative. And thanks so much, Jackie.
Thanks so much, Nicole, and thanks, David and Jacquelyn. We're now going to move into our Q&A time. So if you have questions, I see we already have some coming through, which is great. Please do pop them in the Q&A function and we'll take it from there. All right, so I might start with perhaps a question for you, Nicole. So just a comment that, teleworking has been around for decades. And so why do you think many organizations have really struggled kind of now in moving to more of a teleworking environment?
Yeah, it is a great question, and it's sort of like an oxymoron question. It's like, well, we've been doing this for ages, why aren't we doing it well? And most of my research even has been done in this telehealth space, and we've been doing telehealth for ages, but we haven't had the pickup that we have recently. It's really been this real push sort of scenario that's come through from COVID that's really then sort of extrapolated out and made this at scale, basically. So we've had a lot of people dipping their toes in the water. And as I mentioned, to different forms of success, okay? And really where the downfall is as David alluded to previously, was how organisations don't think strategically about this. They very much take the work that people are doing at work, and they kind of go, well, you can do it at home. We'll help set you up maybe physically, maybe give you an ergonomical chair, and we'll get you connected to the internet, and that you should be able to then manage as an adult your own life at the other end. We've had a very clear divide between our work lives and our personal lives for quite a number of years. And so it's not ingrained behaviour for us to actually then have that immediate ability to be able to shift on and off. So there's many factors at play in this. And so it's not just that, companies think they might be setting them up well. There's lots of individual consultation that needs to go on with employees for this to really stick and be sustainable.
Great, thanks, Nicole. David, did you have anything to add?
Oh yeah, I was just going to endorse what Nicole said, particularly around, and I spoke very little about this, about what it means to have human resource management as a reactive administrative function versus one which is more about thinking, how can we as an organization create competitive advantage? So forward-facing contemporary organizations do that well, but many don't do that well. So I think some of these issues here are going to be around rather, if somebody asks me for some support as an organization, we'll provide it. That's a passive approach versus we are going to actively reach out to our employees. One of the points I made before, and it may come up maybe in another question, but I've really been taken aback by some of the best practice in this area about how even remotely, many organizations are doing regular face-to-face one-on-ones between supervisor and subordinate, even if it's just 10 minutes. Really, really different than a Zoom catch up as a whole group or an email that says, hey, hope everything's okay, let me know if you're not, sort of thing. So it's that type of practice which goes from a reactive basis to a proactive one. And like how the world works, the free economy, capitalism, once the world picks back up again and work becomes much more competitive, and it is in some places already, and we'll definitely get there again, it's those great employers that will get the best of people. That's the way it will work. It always works that way.
Great points there. Another question. So this one is aimed at David. Nicole, I suspect you might be able to jump in as well. But is there a silver lining for employees when it comes to telework? In this environment, it might be difficult for organizations to invest really well in kind of, setting up new systems, new practices. So is there hope for employees, or should we just be grateful to have a job and hope it all ends before we burn out? So is there a silver lining for employees?
Yeah, I'll start, but I'll turn it over to others. I'd like to hear from Nicole on that as well, and anybody else. Absolutely. I mean, I probably didn't cover this enough. I think people really, really like the option of working from home. I think it's a really wonderful concept. What hasn't happened very well is that organizations haven't shifted to managing their businesses that way very well, particularly those that had very little experience in doing telework. I think there's a lot of great silver linings. I know one of the comments that I have with many people around this topic is how valuable it is to have a quick catch up with a small group without having to go to a meeting. And there's so many wonderful benefits from a well-being perspective to telework. The problem is it's all just happened serendipitously so far. And I think what has to happen going forward is that there has to be a lot more work being done to make it work for everybody. As I said earlier, market forces will let this all play out. Those organizations, I have a hospitality and tourism background, a service organization background. The great employers are always great employers, and people want to work for those organizations. So that's who you want to be, I think. Or you can be trying to extract as much as you possibly can out of somebody. And that might work when the job market's in balance, but it won't work forever. I'll pass to somebody else.
Nicole, did you have any?
Yeah, I think some of the silver lining also comes in now in choice. I mean, I know David started this off by saying, some people can't do virtual work, and there is occupations where that is not, where we can't actually engage in that type of delivery. But for those that can, I think moving forward, for many, many years, we've been talking about how we wanted more work-life balance. And it's obviously we've gone on one side of the scale and now we've tipped all the way to the other side of the scale. So the silver lining might be something in the middle where now we've experienced both and we both know that they're both bad. Both employees and organizations know that both of those don't work. So the silver lining has to lie somewhere in the middle where we're starting to see, that's where the environmental sweet spot is, where the organizational sweet spot is, and as employees too. I think with that understanding, I think this will spawn some positive outcomes for employees as well.
Great, thanks, Nicole. Thanks. Jacquelyn, I just wanted to give you perhaps a follow-on question. So in your work, you found that, was it like 3% of people used to telework before COVID? So, kind of listening to, there's all these pros and, benefits and maybe benefits for organizations. So why was it so low before we got to this pandemic?
So studies have indicated there are three possible reasons to explain the low penetration rate. And the first one is the firm's consideration in terms of accountability and workability. So this relates to David and Nicole's their information regarding trust. So basically, the managers have a little bit difficulty trust their employees working at home, whether they will deliver the good quality work versus lose the time they spend in the office. And the second consideration is from the employee. So the employees is concerned about the emotion isolation, concerned about whether they will have the opportunity to be promoted to the next level if they don't come to the office. And the third reason is that the people tends to have the mentality seeing that face-to-face interaction is the best way to secure a business deal. So if you are not able to have a meeting with your clients, it's very difficult to have a business done. So that's why that the penetration rate is so low before the COVID.
Thanks, and then perhaps a follow-up question for Nicole. So you spoke about how maybe what we need moving forward is this hybrid model. So how do you see that being structured? Do you have any advice for how that could work?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's not just a matter of going, okay, we're going hybrid. What does that mean? Hybrid has different forms. So you can have, one side of the scale is having everyone in the office, the other side is having everyone at home. So hybrid is something in the middle. So it doesn't mean a 50-50 split even. And even for each of our individual weekdays, for me as a worker, it might be that I do even 50% on one day, and then, another day, another 2 days of being remote, another 2 days of being in the office. So the split can happen in different ways. I think there's questions for organizations around the type of work that happens within their organizations and the physical space that people need to do that work. They're the two big considerations around that. And so hybrid models of work really then layer over the top of that. Well, what is the organization looking to optimize basically? So it could be that you want to optimize access to talent. You might want to optimize employee productivity, employee experience, and that will kind of dictate to you what some of that hybrid model might look like. And it should be something that you look at from maybe a team's perspective or a unit perspective, a business unit perspective, looking at how that team best functions together and what support can be offered that team to have the most dynamic output. But it really does come down to the type of work that people do and the types of physical space that is needed to do it in. And it's never so clear cut as to be like, well, this section of our workers will go home, this section will stay here. It does even have to be that hybrid split, even with each individual employee. So it can be an individual kind of negotiated space for them.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other comments on that one?
I was just going to say that, you said it really, Nicole. I mean, and I've been reading enough now to know this, that the individual differences also take a big part of this. It's not just occupational groups, it's actually individuals. Some have different preferences, not just segmented by age. So it's actually pretty complicated. If it's just the single come to work approach, it's actually easy to control. But when you start having hybrid models and you have elements of work from home and telework, it actually becomes a little bit more complicated. And what initially starts off as a great benefit, that's lower rents for the organization, less infrastructure necessary, all those kinds of things. I think we're going to find that those benefits may not necessarily last as long as we'd like.
All right, thanks. And so this is a question about sort of returning to work. So do we see increased anxiety among staff as they start to return to pre-COVID normal? For example, working in open plan offices. So any thoughts on that one? I might start with you, David, since you're already talking.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the question now.
Well, so an increase in anxiety around,
yeah, I can see it.
Surrounded by people, right?
I think there's going to be increased anxiety everywhere for a while. So there's no doubt about that. I think the anxiety is going to come from lots of different places. So the hidden cost of mental health is going to become one which is going to continue. What that question basically speaks to is going from being alone all the time to suddenly having to socialize and so forth. That's going to create anxiety. But I mean, we all have an opinion, so it's really easy to speak about these kinds of things. But I think nobody really realistically thinks that in 3 months' time, there'll be a vaccine, and in 5 months' time, everything's going to be normal again. There's going to be an awful lot of anxiety from people for quite some time. So I think there's going to be elevated levels of stress and anxiety across the community that we're not really ready for. And I think that even with better therapeutics to treat COVID-19, I think even with vaccines coming, that's not going away. So the answer is yes, but it's more than just for the reasons that were in that question, I think.
Nicole, so you talked a bit about this kind of hybrid model. So there's a question around, do you think organizations would now have more of an appetite for other types of flexible working? So for example, a compressed 4-day week or job sharing. Do you think COVID has kind of provided, a platform where more creative work solutions are more acceptable?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think absolutely. I think what COVID's done is shown, that it's possible and we're still functioning as organisations and as humans in work roles, etc. I mean, the disruption of technology is coming and was going to ramp up as we've entered into, as we got further down into this decade. But that's sort of been amplified for us now. And we'll see further disruptions as we move down that. And companies that have been smart about it have been sort of preparing for what that looks like. And one of them has been new models. And, we've seen whole new economies coming out of this. We've got gig economies now and all sorts of other ways of working that actually do speak directly to, these new sort of work environments that we're seeing coming through. So I think absolutely organisations have a larger appetite for them. We need to be ensuring or keep putting pressure on organisations to do this well, because when they don't do it well, that's when we'll see all negative consequences of this, and particularly for employees.
Thanks so much, Nicole. So really a time of change and a time of rethinking how we do work. Yeah.
Correct.
I might close up the Q&A section here. So if this webinar has sparked your interest in furthering your education and leadership skills, we encourage you to look into our MBA program. You'll see on your screens we're hosting an information webinar in November for our #1 MBA ranked program. At this information session, we'll show you how our MBA develops global leaders of the future. We'll provide insight into the key features of our MBA, including flexible study options, exclusive international exchanges, real consulting projects, and our dedicated MBA careers and professional development team. We would also love to partner with you through our interdisciplinary research hubs, so through collaborations which develop new knowledge, deliver actionable business outcomes, and shape the future of your industry. 3 of our teams were represented here today by our panel: the Business Sustainability Initiative, the Future of Health, and the Service Innovation Alliance. So if you have any further questions or you'd like to make a connection, we will be sending out detailed emails tomorrow with all of the information for reaching us. That's all we have time for today. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Jacquelyn, David, and Nicole for their valuable insights into the real cost of remote working. And thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. We look forward to hearing from you or seeing you online again soon.